Okay, so I see that there's quite a few attendees now joined since I last spoke. Good afternoon to everyone who's joined. Today's Underwater Acoustics monthly webinar will feature Dr. Denise Risch and Shaula Garibbo. Just as sort of some basic information on webinars, if you'd like to ask a question at any point, please do so either in the chat function or in the Q&A function. The chat often appears on everybody's screens and can be a little bit distracting, so preferably use the Q&A function. That will come to myself and the other members of the UKAN Early Career Committee, as well as the speakers themselves. So we'll monitor that as well as the chat as well. So as there's now quite a few attendees in, without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and hopefully, Denise, you will be able to share yours. Okay. And then you can go first.
Right. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, all good. You can see your screen.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ross. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm happy to share some of our work on passive acoustic monitoring on the Scottish West Coast with you all today. My name is Denise Risch. I work for the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban, and most of the work that I'm going to present today is part of the Compass project, or the first results that we are getting back from this project. It's a large collaboration between Marine Scotland Science, the Agri-Food and Bioscience Institute in Northern Ireland, Inland Fisheries Ireland, and the Marine Institute in Ireland. So large collaboration, and the project was funded by the SUPB under the Interact program. And I'd like to also thank my co-authors here, particularly Ewan Edwards and Suzanne Beck, who are instrumental in actually collecting the data in the field that I'm going to talk about. And I put this little bird on a couple of the slides. Most of the results that I'm going to present are results that are not published yet or are still in the works by some of our students. So just would ask not to distribute those slides further on social media or so on. Okay, so to start, just to show you the project area where we are collecting our data. It's the Scottish West Coast and Northern Irish waters. In yellow here, you see the moorings that we have been monitoring since 2017 under the Compass project. There's a couple of sister projects, the MARPAM project, also collecting acoustic data using a very similar setup. They've started in 2018 or 19, I think. So those are the red dots. The Sea Monitor project started last year, and the Samosas project in green was a project funded by Marine Scotland Science and has been collecting data for the last year. And as I said, I'll concentrate on the Compass project. We've been collecting data since 2017. We're still collecting data. I've only mapped here the data effort that we've had until 2020. We have 10 sites stretching from the top of Lewis down to Northern Ireland, and they are presented here in this figure from north to south, and it shows you the realized recording effort, as was what this figure shows. We did have some data gaps when we lost moorings or couldn't get out to the sites, but overall, as you can see, depending on where the site was, we've got pretty good coverage. Some of the more offshore sites, since like the Marlin site of Donegal, was harder to be covered, and Stanton Bank as well, pretty far offshore. So we've got a few more data gaps there, but overall, pretty good coverage. The data collection is realized by research vessels from Marine Scotland and AFBI, the Albanamara and Scotia in Scottish waters, and Choristis in Northern Irish waters. And our moorings usually look like this. So they are moored to the seabed, and usually carry a C-pod or an F-pod record, automatic click detector to record high-frequency clicks from porpoises, and a sound trap broadband recorder, which is sampling at 96 kilohertz and 20 minutes every hour. And then we've got an acoustic release canister in the bottom to bring the units back. And there's a picture here of one of our moorings. We also are deploying gliders within this project to characterize the oceanography in Scottish waters. And we've trialed to put passive acoustic devices on these gliders as well, and we're able to collect some data, which I'm not going to present. It's quite preliminary. We just got them back, but we've got some deployment from this winter, and we'll have another deployment this summer. So that would be an interesting complementary data set. So one of the drivers behind this project was to monitor marine protected areas, and in our project area, there's 3 MPAs and special area of conservations, SACs in particular, that we were focusing our work on. One is the biggest one is the Inner Hebrides and the Minches SAC, designed for porpoises, designated in 2018, which basically covers most of the Scottish west coast, 13,000 square kilometers. And so I'm just going to present a couple of first results that we've got back from our efforts so far, just looking at the C-pod data. Again, this is preliminary, not completely clean data yet, but just to give you an impression of what we found. So those, it's a very busy plot here, but basically what you see are the sites from north, the more western side on the left and the more eastern side on the right. So Tolster in the north, Storehead on the here on the left. And what these plots are showing are months on the tiles, a month, and then vertically the years that we were monitoring, and then the hours on the y-axis of each tile. So what you can see immediately, hopefully, is that that we've there's on almost all of the sites we've got an increase in porpoise detection in the winter time. That's especially pronounced in the Tolster side, but also in Storehead you can see it, in High Skier, and also Stanton Bank, a bit less pronounced in the Gravelax and the Shant Isles, which are closer, more coastal sites. What you can also notice is that some sites show quite pronounced style pattern, especially here at the High Skier site, for example, which is more apparent here in the months of February to March, and seems to be repeated in the different years that we were monitoring. So this is just a different way of showing this data. I'm just running a simple GAM just to look at the seasonal distribution of the data, and just to highlight again that we have higher detection range. So what I'm plotting here is detection positive hours for, from C-pod data against day of the year. So what you can see, especially in Tolster, we've got an increase in detection positive hours in the winter time. Same picture in Storehead. In the Shant Isles, not so much in the Gravelax, and in High Skier and Stanton Bank, there seems to be a decrease in porpoise presence in the autumn, but again, quite a few detections in the winter time. Which is interesting and important when you think about monitoring MPAs, because most of the data that we had to designate this size came from summer visual surveys. So having this ability to detect porpoises year-round, which acoustics can give us, really shows how important this area seems to be for porpoises also in the winter time, and just gives us a new view into their presence and how they use these sites. Another MPA that is in the project area just recently in December 2020 designated as the Northeast Lewis Nature Conservation MPA. This one was specifically designated for rhesus dolphins and sand eels, their prey. It's on the top of Lewis and covers an area that has been recognized for its presence, or consistent high presence of rhesus dolphins by mostly visual surveys in the past. So we've got our recorder at Tolster Head, which we looked into in terms of dolphin presence, and we can do that because rhesus dolphins have very characteristic, very clear characteristics. So Minister Soldevilla described those for rhesus dolphins in California. Those clicks have a bending pattern. So they have higher peak frequencies at specific frequencies. For California, this was around 25, 31, and 39 kilohertz. We see the same in rhesus dolphins here in Scotland. And you see in this spectrogram here, the bending pattern a little bit. So it's similar frequency, slightly different, probably due to geographic variation, but they're generally around 27, 36 and around 40 kilohertz. So that's what we use to identify rhesus dolphins in our data, which at the moment we're still doing manually, but I'll come back to that. So just to give you a seasonal pattern that we found so far. So this is data from 2018 from the Tolster site. We found rhesus dolphins pretty much there year round, although we haven't been able to analyze data from February to May yet. But we definitely saw a peak of detection positive hours per day in around July, August time. And then again, it looked like a second peak in November, December. But generally a couple of hours per day, these dolphins were recorded at the Tolster site. And if you look at the dial patterns, so what you see here now is the seasonal, the date on the x-axis and the hour of day on the y-axis, and just presence absence of dolphins. And what was interesting, and again I'll come back to that, was to see that there was a clear dial pattern, but only seasonally. So in the later part of the year, when there's less sunlight, we do see a dial pattern, and in summer when we have more daylight, there's less of a dial pattern, and we've seen that in several species. So that was interesting to see that that was true for rhesus dolphins detections as well. Then we've got the Sea of the Hebrides MPA, which was designated also in December 2020 for minke whales and basking sharks. So that's in the southern part of the Scottish part of our project area. And so we've been looking at our recordings for minke whales as well, at 4 of the sites. So Tolster, Shant Isles, High Ski and Stanton Banks, we detected them. There was very interesting to see that we had hardly any detections on most sites except for Stanton Bank, where they're pretty much there from spring all through summer every day. So this is just presence absence per day, what I'm showing here, but very few detections at the other sites. Again, if you look at that in terms of the seasonal and dial pattern, the pattern was repeated in 2018 and 2019. So we started hearing minke whales on Stanton Bank in March, and then all the way through August, September. Unfortunately, we had quite a few data gaps, which are indicated by these darker gray blocks here. So we don't know exactly when they leave the area, but they seem to be arriving around March time, which matches the visual data as well. And yeah, down here again, the number of calls per day against season, showing that July, August are the peak months for detection of minke whales on Stanton Bank. And up here in the corner, you see a typical minke whale pulse train is what we were detecting here. We've also been detecting humpback whale song in our data, which is consistent with lots of other sites that are in more northern area, whereas traditionally we thought humpback whales sing in their breeding areas. They actually sing pretty much year round. They've been detected in Iceland, in Norway, and in Scottish waters. We detect them as well. In the compass array, we found them on so far at the Tolstoy Head and Stanton Bank sites, and particularly March, April, and May. So I mentioned with the rhesus dolphins that a lot of our data analysis at the moment is still manually, so scrolling through data by hand or subsampling data, which obviously with the amount of data that we're collecting, 10 sites for several years, is just not feasible to get through it and detect all the different species. So like many other groups, we are looking into ways to automate the process more. Machine learning is the way that a lot of people are doing it. We've been experimenting with a program called Animal Spot, developed by Christian Bergle and colleagues. They've first developed this deep learning tool on killer whale calls. But they've since applied it to various species, including bottlenose dolphins, birds, and fish. These methods, the tool is based on a convolutional neural networks, are quite effective and are quickly outperforming the detectors that we've been using so far. But there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done, especially if you want to distinguish between different species. So for example, in our case, distinguishing the different dolphin species that we encounter in our project area would be something that needs more work. What I just wanted to point out is that lots of annotated data is needed for training and testing these models, and that's where we hopefully will start to share more data between research groups to get faster at developing these models. We've so far applied this method to detect minke whales in our data. We used a data set from the US and also some of our Scottish data to train and validate the model. We had about 2,000 calls from overall in a training data set, and tested that and validated that against about 500 to 300, 400 calls in those data sets. And just to give you an idea of the precision and recall values that we've gotten so far, Depending on the FFT size that is being used, the recall values were fairly high for the US data sets where most of our data came from, and precision as well. And just as a comparison, if you compare to the pulsing detector that we've been using so far, on the Scottish data set, we had recall values of 74% and 20% precision only, so a lot of false positives, which with this new approach was greatly reduced, and with more Scottish data being used for training, I think we'll be able to increase those numbers as well and make the detector really efficient to be used to detect the species, and hopefully we'll be able to do this for other species as well. And so, yeah, just to say again, I think what we really need is more data sharing of annotation data sets or annotated data for different species. And there's some practical limitations still, but there's tools like PAMGuard or here the GetEdit tool developed by colleagues from Scripps to quickly annotate data. And there's also citizen science project like the Zooniverse, where people are just asking the general public to help annotating data. And I think it'd be nice to, and I kind of wanted to use this talk to open up the conversation about the possibility to share data within the UK, where we, are trying to detect similar species, to develop these new tools for better and more efficient data analysis. Just this data also, of course, and if you want to share them, you need to use common standards and saving them, and in order to share them between research groups, we're using a system called TEFIS. You can look up more about the system. It's basically an SQL database system developed by Scripps. Again, the website here, you can find out more in this publication by Marie Risch from 2016. So it's a freely available open source database which allows to collect your metadata from your acoustic data collection as well as your detection data. So I think that's a brilliant tool that might be able to be leveraged to share data between research groups. Just a quick mention of we're not just using the COMPASS data to detect and monitor different species. We're also looking at ambient noise and anthropogenic noise in the project area. This is just some AIS data plotted here to illustrate it's a busy area of the sea. So it's just 1 year of shipping data that is shown here, and we're currently looking at analyzing the ambient noise data across our array and our project years. We'll also be looking at the impact that COVID had, because we have had some recorders in the water during the first lockdown. I don't have any results yet to present, but we did a similar study in Sweden last year, and where we looked at a cold water coral reef together with Laurence de Clipperley, my colleague from Edinburgh, and we could see with the reduction in ferry traffic between Norway and Sweden, which goes straight across the coral reef we looked at, we found differences in I think 5 to 9 dB during lockdown. So it'd be interesting to see what we find for the COMPASS area. And with this, I just want to thank everyone involved in data collection, analysis, and communication. Again, the funders, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Denise. That was a great talk. At the moment, it doesn't look like there is any specific questions that have been entered in the Q&A or in the the chat function. If anyone would like to enter them at any stage, please feel free to. Normally, I forgot to mention this at the very beginning, in these webinars we tend to do our questions after both speakers have presented, so feel free now to put any questions in and we will be able to answer those following Shaula's talk. So with that in mind, Shaula, would you like to present or share your screen if possible? Okay, fantastic.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Shaula. I'm from the Department of Physics at the University of Bath, and I'm just going to take you through some of my PhD research. So I'm looking at low frequency ocean acoustics at the Vesterålen Observatory in the north of Norway. So the Vesterålen, or LUVI, to keep it short, was launched in 2013. It's a collaborative project between Metas, Equinor and the Institute of Marine Research. And it's currently got one functioning node, which I've circled here on the map in white, node 1, which is where the hydrophone is located. So node 1 is 15 kilometers offshore and 255 meters below sea level in its oceanic trough. The hydrophone is attached to a metal frame that's anchored into the sea floor. Sadly, there isn't a full year of coverage in the year that I looked at, but the data gaps are mostly just in the summer. The hydrophone itself records between 10 Hz to 200 kHz, with sampling rates varying between 32 kHz to 64 kHz. And although the nearest main shipping lane is about 55 kilometers to the northwest, there's quite a lot of local shipping or boats in the form of ferry traffic, and there's some nearby fishing areas as well. So the initial processing of the raw hydrophone data was done in MATLAB using a software called PAMGuide, which was put together by Nathan Merchant et al. For work involving the passive monitoring of acoustic habitats. I've put the reference in the bottom left. But the analyses in PAMGuide include power spectral density, third octave levels, broadband analysis, and spectral statistics and some other bits as well. And it's just generally very user-friendly with multiple options for easily applying calibration. So the calibration values that were used from the hydrophone specs themselves, which are also available on the LUVI website, and also corroborated with other literature from LUVI. So for example, this Odgaard paper looked at wind noise at LUVI. And then the data was then bandpass filtered between 10 Hz and 125 Hz to incorporate the second band, the MSFD flagged for the monitoring shipping noise pollution. So I would say the three most common signals that were observed in the LUVI data in 2018 are wind noise, shipping noise, whales and earthquakes. But this first example is over about 10 minutes, and you can just see that the soundscape is saturated with broadband sound. And I found that in most cases, these periods coincide with periods of high wind speeds. The second example is of shipping noise, over around 45 minutes long. And this is a very distinctive signal with the horizontal broad stripes, and these correspond to harmonics from the moving parts of the ship, so the propeller or parts of the engine. And it quite often displays this U-shaped pattern that you can see here. This is just Lloyd's mirror effect. The U shapes vary in degree of symmetry, but this slight asymmetric aspect of it reflects where more of the sound is radiated, so wherever the working engine happens to be on board. The third example here is of different types of whale vocalizations. I'm not massively familiar with different whale vocalizations, so if anyone wants to point out what they are, feel free. But for me, these are sort of two separate frequencies. You've got the higher frequency components that you can see dotted about, and then you can see this, well, in this particular spectrogram, this like 20 Hertz high. It looks continuous in this spectrogram, but when you look at on a shorter time scale, that you can see that it's actually made of lots of discrete components. And you can also see it in the wind spectrogram on the left, but I'll show you a better example shortly. And then earthquakes as well. So another common signal is this soft spike signal here, just after 500 seconds. And many of these signals have been tied in with earthquakes. So an example of just how they've been tied in with earthquakes in this work, starting at the International Seismological Centre. It's a good website to go to if you want earthquake information from anywhere in the world. So according to the ISC bulletin, there was an earthquake on the 25th of April 2018 at 6 minutes and 56 seconds past midnight, of magnitude of 4.9. And you can see I've mapped it in the bottom right. So the green dot is the epicenter and the hydrophone is the blue triangle. So the geodesic distance between these 2 points is 830 kilometers. And just using a standard water velocity of 1.5 kilometers per second means that the signal should arrive at Luby at 16 minutes and 8 seconds past midnight. So the strongest part of the signal arrives at 16 minutes and 10 seconds past midnight, and it arrives, so that arrives within 0.5% of the predicted travel time. So it agrees fairly well. The strongest part of the signal, so the big spike here in the spectrogram, just corresponds to the water phase, so the part of the sound signal that pretty much travelled exclusively through the water column between the epicenter and the hydrophone. And then these other smaller spikes are just seismic phases where the sound waves travelled through the earth and radiated back into the water column at a later point down the line from the epicenter to hydrophone. This is just one example, but I did this for about 150 odd earthquakes in 2018, and they all tied fairly well. So, but as you can imagine, that was quite a time-consuming process. So the work since then has branched out into automatic detectors. So obviously there were 150 earthquakes I looked at, but the number of whale vocalizations present in the data massively outweighs the number of documented earthquakes. So the identification of all of these has been far more time-consuming. There are lots of ways of designing detectors. But I came across this software called Ketos at the International Quiet Ocean Experiment Conference last year, which uses deep learning to build an underwater acoustic detector. And this particular one uses spectrogram, so image-based analysis, and it's had massive, performing very, very well. For example, in this paper, Hay et al. Paper, the deep learning algorithm outperformed the human analyst in an image classification task. So with Ketos, it's very user-friendly. It's just a Python package. It's sort of designed for people who've never built their own deep learning algorithm before, so it's very easy to use. So just the first step was to accumulate the annotations, fin whale annotations. So I made 2,863 myself of varying lengths. So on the right, you can see examples of the annotations, and that none of them, and you can see better that they're individually spaced and about 1 second long for each one. Here they're all nice and evenly spaced, but they quite often present in doublets or triplets. And you can see that the annotations are a few seconds apart, not just one, but each individual call is well documented to be about 1 second long. So I then split down all of my annotations into 1 second windows with a 50% overlap, and breaking it all down resulted in 10,018 fin whale spectrogram segments. Then there's a function in Ketos that randomly generates noise around your annotations. So I just used that and generated an equal number of noise spectrograms. So I've put a little glossary to the side, because if you're unfamiliar with deep learning, like I was when I began, it can be a bit overwhelming. But so 80% of the full amount of annotations, including the noise, were allocated to training and validation, and 20% were allocated to testing. And then 80% of the 80% was allocated to training, and 20% of the 80% was allocated to validation. And then all of that was run through 30 times. We went with 30 because it provided a good balance between computation time and performance. I should mention the actual Ketos provides you with a blank neural network to start with. So the blank one that I used was a residual neural network with hidden convolutional layers in the hidden layers. And then you can tweak it if you want to. So using Ketos, so 20% of the annotated data came to 607 manual annotations of fin whale calls. So the KETOS algorithm made a total of 572 fin whale detections. Of the 572 detections, 569 of them were correct, yielding an accuracy of 93.7%. And then of the 572 fin whale detections, 3 of them were false positives, yielding a precision of 99.4%. And the algorithm misclassified 35 fin whale calls as noise, leading to a recall rate of 94.2%. So using that algorithm, we ran it over the whole data set of 2018, and you can see the number of fin whale detections per day plotted. I'm presenting the entire year despite the data gaps to show how it varies and how the number of calls matches the well-known breeding period when the whales are vocalising a lot. And the missing data fortunately corresponds to times when there are many less whales. So the breeding period in the Northern Hemisphere for this area should be in the winter months from December to March, according to the literature, so it agrees fairly well. The drop in call rate at the end of January seems to correlate with periods of high wind speeds and also quite heavy shipping, which may have worked to either obscure the signals or scare the fin whales away, or it might be that the fin whales stopped vocalising or changed what song type they were singing or anything, but that's just an idea of what may have caused the drop in the end of January. But overall, the increased number of calls detected in the winter months agree with what we were expecting to see. So using the fin whale algorithm, you could just pull out the power spectral densities of all the detected calls in the year. So here the power spectral density is plotted between 15 and 25 hertz, with the error bars marking plus and minus 1 standard deviation from the mean. These represent the received levels and not the source levels. But in February, you can see where most calls are detected, the levels are much more tightly constrained. The variations in the levels are related to the calls and also how far away the whales are from the hydrophone. But it might be that they're more constrained in February because they're also more geographically constrained possibly, or just all roughly the same distance from the hydrophone. So I can take this approach and theoretically fairly straightforwardly apply to other signals that have distinct features in a spectrogram. So here I've taken earthquakes as an example. So an annotated data set would first need to be acquired or done yourself, with some attention paid to the average duration of the signals and frequency range. So here, for example, there's a signal that's 1.5 seconds in length and another that's 1 second, and they cover 10 to 35 hertz and 10 to 30. So an ideal spectrogram may represent like 1.25 second windows between 10 and 30 hertz. But in reality, some trial and error would be necessary to determine what those parameters should be. And overall, just provide a shortcut to analysis of the actual signals rather than spending all the time looking for them. And that's pretty much all the work I've done with the LUVI data so far. So overall, I found shipping, wind, earthquakes and fin whales in the LUVI data in 2018. Some earthquakes were confirmed using the ISC bulletin, grand total of 151 earthquakes. KETOS was used to create a fin whale detector for all available data of 2018. And the number of calls peaked in the winter months, which coincides with breeding season. And the power spectral density levels may indicate distance from the hydrophone and geographic constraints. And now just in the process of applying the same approach within KETOS to other signals of interest. So at the moment, I'm doing earthquakes. But that's pretty much everything.
Okay, thank you, Shaula. That was really great talk as well, and nicely complementing each other by talking about your passive acoustic monitoring in different locations. So I'll just open it up now to questions. So if anyone would like to post any questions either in the chat or the Q&A function, myself and the other panelists can keep an eye on it. While I'm waiting for any questions, I can open up with one. Something that came to mind in both of your talks was the question of dialects. So you're both looking at whale detections or different marine mammal detections. And Denise, you alluded to that you're using a US data set for some Scottish detections, and that might be why you're getting a drop in your precision and accuracy. I wonder whether, how are you going to go about this problem of dialects? Do you think it's just you need a larger training data set? And likewise for Shaula, I guess as a follow-up, do you think dialects is going to be, if you were to apply your detector to somewhere else, would that lower the accuracy?
Yeah, I can quickly answer. So in terms of the minke whales, I think it's actually less the geographic variation in the calls. We've looked a little bit into that. The interpulse interval differs slightly, but not very much. I think it's more the context, because these are spectrogram-based methods, and I think it's more the different recording methods and the soundscape that differs. So I think by using annotated data from the site that you're looking at, you'll then build better models that work better in whichever site you're looking at. So I think having site-specific annotated data is really important.
And I guess as a kind of follow-up, Shaula, do you have any specific signals you're interested in applying your detector to? You mentioned earthquakes. Is there anything else that you have maybe detected? Is there any fish or anything else in your data set?
Sorry, I struggled to unmute myself there for some reason. Yeah, well, I think in terms of fish, for example, I think because I'm looking at lower frequencies, I think a lot of the biological sources that you would detect are probably out of the frequency range of under 100 hertz. But I don't know, because I'm not massively familiar with a lot of animal vocalizations, so it might be that I am missing some things. But I'm now working on just fully classifying big chunks of data to find signals that I don't actually know the origin of. So maybe. Yeah.
Great. So it does look like we have a question from Natalie Sinclair saying, thank you for your talks. In terms of using QTOS for applying deep learning to acoustic signals, I'm thinking about the application to humpback whale song units. You said minimal knowledge of deep learning is required beforehand. Can you expand on that? Could you start from zero, or would you recommend any specific primers on deep learning beforehand?
Well, I think it's fair to say that I pretty much started at zero. So, I mean, if you go, I've included, I think you'll be able to see it. I included the link to the docs on my slides, but it's very easy to find as well. There's like a tutorial that will take you through the actual software and how it runs, and I think you can learn a lot about it just by going through the tutorial. But I managed to use it, and I definitely didn't have any expert knowledge in deep learning, so I would say you could start from zero.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had some success for sure, which is great.
Yeah, just to say, I think even though it's a different system, but Animal Spot, I haven't used it myself, but my student who developed the model also basically had a similar experience. Basically started from scratch. There's good manuals, and yeah, those tools are becoming more and more accessible.
So just to kind of follow up to that, we had another question about if there is training videos available for those sort of platforms. Do either of you know of those sort of tools?
I'm not familiar with videos, but yeah, documentation is available for sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen any training videos for Ketos, but yeah, the tutorial and the docs are very, very good. I don't know about the animal spot or anything.
And within the Q&A, somebody commented that there is a past paper by Susanna Bouchan of Funwao Song of Chile that may be of interest. And this is also used for CBTBO hydrophones. I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, but
yeah, I'm familiar with that paper. It's a very good paper and very helpful.
I can make.
So with both of these,
sorry.
Oh yeah, carry on, Denise.
Oh, I just saw the question from Ben about individuals of species and dolphins having names. So that's true. Yes, the dolphins or bottlenose dolphins is where it has been studied the most. Produce these signature whistles that are individual specific, and actually our colleagues at the Lighthouse Field Station in Aberdeen, they are looking into using animal spot. I think they're just in development of trained models to detect these signature whistles. So that's definitely work that can be done.
Great, thank you.
And I suppose for me, Denise, from a policy perspective, how is the Compass work actually kind of potentially feeding into protection, conservation, any sort of policy implications, if I can get the word out? Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of ambient noise, we'll be feeding the results of the ambient noise analysis that we'll be doing into the MSFD process, and we'll probably be in touch with CFAS about that. In terms of species detection, we're also talking with Nature Scot and Marine Scotland on basically developing better methods in order to detect the species, and also thinking about monitoring these large areas that are designated now, but for which no real management plans and monitoring programs exist yet. So that's kind of the next step, and I'm hoping that passive acoustics will play a big role in how we're going forward monitoring these vast areas, and hopefully effective management options that are going to be developed.
So if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to continue to put them in to the chat or the Q&A function, because we still have a few minutes left of this webinar session. And we've still got quite a few attendees, so I'm sure you're all still interested to hear what Denise or Shaula have to say.
I was about to jump in with one, if I may. You've shown sort of the detection of anthropogenic noise and marine species. Can you, or is it of interest to look at any interactions between those things? Can you look at where, for some reason, there's been a lot of shipping noise, for example, and yeah, you're nodding. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, for sure. We haven't really done it yet based on the Compass data, because we're just, as you saw, we're on the just really starting to dig into the data, and it's very rich and it's a lot of data to look at. But for sure that'd be interesting to look at. I just this morning read a really interesting paper from New Zealand, which looked at communication space. So looked at the reduction of noise levels during the lockdown period. And I don't know, Rosalind, I think you were involved with that study, weren't you? But anyway, so they looked at the differences in communication space due to a drop of noise levels, and that's one way how you could approach the overlap of noise hotspots with areas that species are using and trying to communicate. And obviously that period that we had last year is helping us to get for some areas at least to get baseline levels that we never had before. So we can actually look at what the natural soundscape would sound like if there wasn't any anthropogenic noise, so that those studies are just coming out now, and we're looking into that in our data as well.
Great. Yeah, I think I heard in someone talking about that sort of thing, that the effect of small passenger craft that wouldn't have AIS, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So
that interesting.
Yeah, so there's this paper that I mentioned used also a deep learning tool, basically to detect signatures of vessels, of smaller vessels, to look at vessel presence in relation to noise levels. So that's a way to do it. You can also look at vocal behavior changes in marine mammals, for example. So in relation to noise, you can look at call production rate, source levels, if you can localize, etc. So that's definitely possible.
Great. Yeah, I think that's all I've got. I'll hand back to Rob.
Yeah, that was an interesting question. Yeah, that paper in Global Change Biology, I believe, just came out this morning. I wasn't personally involved in it, but I know the people who did it. I used to live and work in New Zealand, not any longer. Yeah, I guess a big question about the COVID analysis you mentioned at the end. I think this is going to be something that many institutes around the world are going to be announcing or releasing their own research once they're able to analyze their 2020 data. Yeah, are you looking at a particular species or a particular? I wasn't quite sure with that if you were covering all of the MPA areas in your analysis, or if you're just going to focus on one in particular on that final slide.
Yeah, we actually had some. We weren't able to cover all the sites in the COMPASS data, but we have. Yeah, I just finished looking through our data to see where we had overlapping data in the years previous, so 2018-19, that we can compare against 2020, and that's, I think we have at three or four of our sites, we have a pretty good data that we can compare, and yeah, so we'll focus as a start at just looking at the differences in ambient noise levels, and then we'll have to see, we might look into communication space as well. And I expect for our area, I expect to see, or from what I've seen from a preliminary analysis, there weren't as dramatic changes because vessel traffic was still out there during the first lockdown even, but I think the biggest drop in noise levels we'll be seeing at the recorders that are close to the ferry lines that, you know, that had reduced traffic. So Storehead for us in the northern part of our project area is probably where we'll see the biggest change, but maybe also the recorders that are further offshore. I'm not quite sure whether the Love Observatory was in the water the whole time. Shaula, do you know?
Shaula, I think you're muted if you are responding, if you're still there.
Yeah, so there are quite big data gaps in the Luby data as well. I think they had some issues with well, I've only really looked at 2018 with cabling or something to it, but that's everything I know about being in, running. But they're very responsive, so if you ever do use the data and you have any questions about it and you email them, they answer, and they're very, very helpful. I think you mentioned actually that they're very helpful.
I have a quick follow-up on communication space and frequencies. So as I understand it, marine mammals can change their frequency of their calls as a response to noise. And is that a potential problem for either of your methods for detecting species? If a species in a noisy environment makes a noise, and then COVID comes along, everything becomes quieter, and they make a different, a lower frequency vocalization, is that going to wreak havoc with your detectors? I'll pick on Shaula first.
Well, the fin whale detector was just for 20 Hertz calls. I can't remember. So far, I mean, the differences between all the 20 Hertz calls I've seen in the Lugo data are pretty subtle. So I'd say 3 Hertz max either side of like the typical sort of 17 to 22 Hertz range. And I did make a conscious effort to pick all of them, all the different groups that I saw. But I think because in terms of whale vocalizations, the 20 Hertz one is quite a well-constrained vocalization. So I don't know, I'd have to try it, but I wouldn't expect it to fail too badly. But I think with the more variable calls, it probably would cause a bit more of a problem.
Yeah, I would agree with it. I think the it has been shown in various studies that whales can shift their frequency, but only so much. So I think over longer time periods, you might have to adjust detectors. So for example, with blue whales in the Southern Ocean, I think the frequencies have been going down, I think, over the last decades quite a bit. So over and I don't think it's clear why that is happening. And so over time you might have to adjust detectors, but I think the adjustments that they might make in response to relatively short-term events wouldn't be big enough to really affect detectability.
Okay, so these changes don't happen overnight.
No, well, or they might happen overnight, but they might not be as dramatic that that you wouldn't pick up the call anymore using these methods. I think.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
I believe so. Philip Blondell has put a comment or a question in the chat. So communication space and changing frequencies. There are 2 issues there. Number 1, the detectors and how they can be adapted. Shaula's answer. And number 2, the physiology of the animals considered, how much they can change their vocalization frequencies. So Denise's answer. And as Ben says, these changes do not happen overnight. So thank you for that clarification. A very nice summary there. If there is any other questions, please do feel free to quickly put them in the chat or the Q&A function, because we've got a couple minutes left of this. And while I'm just waiting, if anyone does have any questions, I'll just mention that these underwater acoustics webinars happen on the last Thursday of the month. So our next one will be scheduled for the last Thursday in August, which I just put up with the calendar, is the 26th of August next month. So if you follow the same registration page that you went on the UKAN website for this webinar, you can register for that event. And if you registered already for this one, you may already receive an email just to invite you to the next ones and the follow-ups throughout this year's series. And also, if you ever have any requests for speakers or any suggestions for people you would like to hear from, / you would like to be a presenter yourself, then please do reach out to the UKAN committee on the Underwater Acoustics special interest group, because there's a link on that page, and we're always on the lookout for new speakers. So with that, it doesn't look like there's any other follow-up questions in the chat and the Q&A function. So I'd just like to say thank you to our two presenters, Denise and Shaula, for fantastic talks today. And I hope all of you have a very nice rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.